This right here is a very, very powerful tool. This is a flash, specifically a speedlight. And today I'm going to explain the basics of speedlights, what you might want to consider when you buy a speedlight, and overall just how they work and how to use them. So let's get right to it. Hello, I'm Noah from Anything Cameras, the channel that focuses on helping you improve your filming and photography. And today it's all about speedlights. So as I mentioned, this is specifically a speedlight, but it's also called a flash. So what are the different kinds of flashes, and why would you want to go with this instead? Well, the other primary type of flash is a strobe light. These are big studio lights that cost much more, but they are usually more powerful, have better controls, and are bigger sources, which often leads to a nicer quality of light. But you can get away and get very nice photos even with a speedlight. Now, speedlights range from about $20 to $700. It's pretty crazy. This right here is actually just a $20 speedlight, and I've used it to get pretty good portrait photos before. Three of the ways that this speedlight kind of cheats to get you a lower price are: one, that it uses an atypical control system; two, its build quality isn't very nice, it's just a cheap plastic; and three, the flash power and quality isn't as good. So let's start with the control system. This speedlight has this little power meter in the form of bars, and the biggest bar is most powerful, and the smallest bar is the least powerful. Normally, the system that is used is in fractions. I'm not exactly sure why this is or where it originated from, but in many speedlights, you have a highest power of 1/1, then it goes to 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, and depending on the flash, it may go to 1/32, 1/64, or maybe even 1/128. The build quality is pretty self-explanatory. This is just a cheap plastic. It doesn't have a whole ton of swivel, and it just could break at any moment, basically. And then there's the flash power and the flash quality. Obviously, with a cheaper flash, not only are the controls and the build quality going to be as nice, but the light isn't going to be as nice. You may think, well, it's just a flash of light. Does the quality really change that drastically? And the answer is yes, it actually does. For one thing, the bigger the bulb, the better the quality. But the bigger the bulb, the harder it is to flash it without it failing sooner. So this actually uses a very small tube, and then the source is only about that big, and you have to modify it to get a softer light. You always have to modify a flash, no matter how expensive, because otherwise it will just look horrible. But the smaller the light source, the harder it is to modify, because you're going to get less power and more light will be lost in the modification. And then there's something called CRI. CRI is just the accuracy of the color of the light. You'll often see this in LED lights, but it even applies to flash bulbs or halogen bulbs. A higher CRI, such as 95 plus, means that it's very color accurate, like the sun is, and a lower CRI means that you're often going to see some kind of green tint or magenta tint, so this flash isn't going to be super color accurate. And while that's not too big a deal for photos, you always want to get as much right in camera so that you don't have to correct as much in post. So now we know why flashes range in price so drastically. What price point should you choose? Before I continue, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon for more awesome content like this. Well, a lot of it comes down to your budget. If you're on a really tight budget, I wouldn't recommend going with a $20 flash like this, but $60 and up is generally going to be pretty okay quality. Just keep in mind that you are going to have to buy a light stand, maybe a bracket, as well as soft boxes or umbrellas for it. But then there's the expensive range, like $400. Why would you choose this over a nice studio strobe? Well, for one thing, they're more portable. If you're doing location shoots, it's really hard to lug around a whole strobe, whereas you can just set up a speedlight with a softbox and get a very nice result. And even speedlights in studio scenarios work very well, and there are advantages to them over strobes. So then, how do you want to use a speedlight? Well, as I mentioned, you need to modify it in some way. Otherwise, the image is going to look like this, and that's not a very nice photo, is it? My recommendation is a softbox, and the bigger, the better. There are several different types of softboxes, and even a few different types of mounting systems. There's an umbrella mounting system, which is generally the cheapest. There's a Speedlight mounting system, and a strobe mounting system. My recommendation is the Speedlight mounting system. This puts the Speedlight right up against the back of the softbox, and has it shine directly through. Any stray light will bounce off the reflective interior of the softbox and bounce back out. This gives a very nice soft light, even if you don't diffuse it. I would still always diffuse it, but it does improve it. If you're on a budget though, getting a bracket adapter as well as an umbrella mounting softbox is going to be the way to go. This system doesn't always work as well. You have less versatility in the angle that you can put the softbox at. However, it does have one advantage in that it shoots the speedlight at the back of the softbox and then it bounces out, giving you sometimes a softer light. And then there's exposure and the mode that you want to set your flash to. First of all, exposure kind of just takes some practice to get right. You can almost always set your camera settings first and then set the speed light strength accordingly. I'd recommend 100 ISO or whatever your lowest ISO is, a shutter speed of around 1/160th of a second, and the widest aperture that you have. The aperture in a studio scenario doesn't matter quite as much because there's often a flat background behind the subject anyway. Then you set your flash exposure. Some flashes, usually only the more expensive ones, have something called ETTL or TTL that guesses your exposure for you based off your camera settings. But you also need a compatible system that allows your flash and camera to communicate in that way. Sometimes ETTL or TTL don't always work that well though, so I prefer to set my exposure manually on the flash unit or the strobe using a test subject before my client arrives. And then there's the mode. If you set your exposure manually, you'll want to use manual mode. There's also, as I mentioned, ETTL and TTL, but then there's also slave mode. I don't recommend using slave mode because what it does is it waits to see a flash from another flash, and then it flashes when it sees that flash. And it does allow you to set the exposure, but the problem with this is that if it's in a softbox or if it's not quite in the line of sight of the flash, then it's not always going to flash. So my recommendation is just use a system that transmits from your camera when you take a photo and goes directly to your flash or flashes. Usually you'll have to put a transmitter on top of your camera. Often the transmitter looks something like this. This just goes into the hot shoe of your camera. It has a little electrical contact, and when your camera takes a photo, this sees it, sends a signal to the receivers, which are either built into your flash or you put your speedlight on them, and then they flash. For you budget people out there who can't afford a nice flash with a built-in receiver, which is understandable, then you're probably going to be looking at a kit like this. This is a $30 kit by Newer, the same people who made that Speedlight, and it has 2 receivers, and you just put your flash on top, and then you would probably put these onto your bracket with the umbrella mount, and your flash on top of the receiver, and then put a softbox or umbrella over top of it all. And then there's light placement, which gets super complicated, and we have a few videos about this on our channel already. We have 2 videos about one light setups, which I encourage you to check out in the cards above, and soon we will probably come out with a video on 2 light setups. These use continuous lights, but they work for photo and video, and on the photo side, they work for continuous lighting or flash lighting. Hopefully this helped clear up how flashes work, how you should use them, and what gets the best results. Thanks for watching.